Good afternoon, everyone. Officially afternoon now. I'm excited about this event, our first virtual event for our clients and their friends. Everyone should automatically be muted, but we encourage questions throughout the presentation. So if you do have any questions, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen where you can message us any questions, and we'll also get those questions answered. And then we'll have a Q&A session towards the end of the presentation, so you also can save those questions towards the end. This meeting is being recorded and will be shared on our website in the next week or two after a suitability review. So please watch your language, and also if you can, stay muted throughout the presentation, and then we'll open up questions at the end. I'm particularly excited about today's presentation, JP Morgan's Guide to Retirement. The Paragon team and I had the opportunity to see this at a recent conference, and we knew it would be a great value for our clients. This presentation provides high-level overview of your retirement planning. And at Paragon, our role is to take these key insights and help our clients apply them to their specific situations, ensuring that their retirement plans align with their unique needs. Now, let me introduce to you Michael Conrath. He's Chief Retirement Strategist at JP Morgan Asset Management. Michael has over 25 years of experience in investment and wealth management, specializing in identifying strategies to enhance retirement savings and improve retirement income outcomes for individuals across the wealth spectrum. He's been featured in television, radio, print media, including CNBC, Bloomberg TV, The Wall Street Journal, Yahoo TV, Fox News, PBS, Cheddar, Morningstar, and Investment News. Sounds like he's a busy man, discussing wealth management and investment planning. So without further ado, I'll pass the mic over to Michael. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you so much, Phil. Appreciate that. I think maybe busy is not the operative thing. I think it's more I need to shorten my bio. But I appreciate the kind introduction, and it's great to be here with you all, and appreciate the partnership with all of you at Paragon-Wealth. So it's great to be with all of you today. So I'm going to do my best to cover a lot of ground in a relatively short period of time. And if there's time at the end, happy to take any questions as well. But like jumping into retirement planning, it's a big topic. As I mentioned, it does cover a lot of ground. And on that note, I saw a stat fairly recently that frankly blew my mind a little bit. And it was something along the lines of the average person spends more time planning vacation than they do planning retirement. And, at first I chuckled a little bit, but I put on my thinking cap and I started thinking about it, and it kind of sunk in that retirement planning, it can feel overwhelming because it's not just about having a quote unquote retirement account. It's not just about having an IRA, 401k. It involves so much more. And I think of it in terms of decisions. Retirement planning involves a lot of different decisions. And certainly there's the finances, and that's a very important part of that. So the math, that does matter, and your finances certainly matter, and how you plan and importantly invest make a big difference. But outside of the finances, it's a conversation and planning discussion that involves your family, involves discussion around health-related matters, and we'll talk a little bit about that, your community, your legacy, and retirement, frankly, means different things to different people. So it's important when you're working with the team to put together a strategy that you're thinking about it through your own individual or looking at it through your own individual lens. So I think maybe a helpful place to start, so it doesn't feel so overwhelming, is what I call the retirement equation. And for those of you who think I'm going to get into a bunch of math, I'm not going to do that. This retirement equation involves no math, but what it does involve is different levels of control. And think of it as having three different levels of control around these things. First, things you have total, complete control over. Two, things you have some influence over. And three, things that are completely out of your influence, out of your control. So let's go through those quickly, and then I'll tackle them as we continue the conversation this afternoon. So what are some of the things that are completely out of your control? Well, that includes things like geopolitics, um, anything related to world events, markets. By the way, we can't control markets or what markets do. We can obviously mitigate risks and make sure we're appropriately invested to take advantage of opportunities, limit downside risk, but we can't ultimately control the outcome of these things. And the thing is, ironically, these are the things, at least for me, that when I look at my news feed on my phone, which you can't see over the virtual camera here, but when I look at my phone, these are the things that typically set off my emotional triggers. And it's important to kind of keep it in context. Do you have a plan to manage these things that are out of your control? And once you recognize that, you can look at things, okay, what do I have some influence over? Well, that includes how long you choose to work or when you choose to retire. We'll talk more about that, but also how long you live, your longevity. So the decisions we make every single day around our own wellness, health, diet, so on and so forth, these do influence our longevity. So we have some control over those factors. But importantly, the third piece here is what do we have full and complete control over? And I'll summarize it in two things. One, our saving, and two, our spending. And when I'm talking about saving, I'm really more talking about investing. So how we choose to invest and how we think about that relative to our goals. And it's important to align your investment decisions with your goals. And that's certainly where the Paragon-Wealth team can certainly add a lot of value in helping you get that aligned. So let's tackle these. And I'm going to start with things that are somewhat within your control. For starters, that's how long we work. Now, many of us may have an idea of mind when we choose to retire. And what we found is, not surprisingly, is most people think of age 65 as their target for retirement. So again, not that uncommon. But what was interesting is while 7 in 10, what we're showing on the left-hand side of this page here, 7 in 10 people chose age 65, their actual experience was very different, which is what we're showing in that smaller purple bar. Barely 1 in 3 actually hit that target. And what we found is most people actually retired earlier, and it's for a variety of reasons. And look, some people had the ability to do that through their financial decisions, their investments. They were given that option and they opted into retirement, which is great. But what you can see on the right-hand side of the page, sometimes that decision is made for us, whether it's some health-related issue, disability, some change in our work status, being downsized, layoffs, or you know what? I might have to transition out of the workforce to care for a family member. And I can tell you, thinking of my own family and my parents, when my dad retired, he had a date in mind, but that decision was made for him. He was downsized. He thought he had a few more years. And that decision was made for him. So it's important that you plan ahead for these what if scenarios. What if something happens? Can I cover those gap years between my target date and when I actually do retire in reality? So again, planning is key there. One thing that's interesting is, when I read articles in the press or hear things in the news just on retirement planning in general, a lot of the rules out there are based on averages. And for that reason, I think some of the traditional rules might be a bit broken. And I mean, how many of you would say that you're average in every aspect of your lives? Probably no one, right? Of course, I like to think I'm an above average driver. My wife would probably tell you otherwise, but look, most of us can't base our lives based on averages, and they're really just a midpoint. And that is certainly true when it comes to our longevity or life expectancy. And one pitfall that I see some individuals make as it relates to retirement planning is they plan for an average life expectancy. And what we found, it's actually probably more helpful to think of probabilities or likelihood of living to certain ages. Now, I'll walk through a couple things on the page here, but just to kind of highlight, just give you perspective. The good news is, as a society, we are living longer. And today, there are about 90,000 centenarians, meaning you've reached the age of 100. 90,000 centenarians here in the U.S. today, which is a big number. It was only about 50,000 centenarians about a decade and a half ago. But looking forward, you look at the year 2060, we're looking at over 500,000. Actually, the number is closer to 600,000 centenarians. So life expectancy is going up, which is generally a good thing, but that does change the retirement equation a bit. We have to plan for living a longer life and think about our investments a bit differently, perhaps. Make sure not only will our money last, but will we maintain our purchasing power relative to inflation while hitting all our other goals. So what we're showing here are life expectancies for different cohorts. And look, the good news for women is you generally live longer than men. So the bad news is us guys generally don't live as long. But I'm going to focus on that third display, the blue bars, and that's looking at a couple. So, for example, I'm a member of a married couple, my wife and I. And what this is showing is the likelihood that one of us will live to a given age. So, for example, the likelihood of at least one of us living to age 90 is that second blue bar, 43%. Now, you might notice there's a lighter blue bar above that, 73%. That is if that couple is in excellent health, primarily being non-smokers. You can see the life expectancy numbers jump significantly. So a 73% chance that at least one member of that couple will live to at least age 90. Now, if you pan the camera one bar to the right, that third blue bar, you can see that number is 46%. So that's about a 50-50 coin toss that at least one member of that couple will live to at least age 95. So you certainly need to generally plan to live a long life, and it's not uncommon to be thinking about 30 or 35 years in retirement without a paycheck. So how are you going to fund that? Now, one of the other industry rules of thumb that I've heard for a long time is around replacement rates. And just to take a step back, what I mean by that is how much of my pre-retirement income do I need to replace once I transition into retirement? And look, spending generally will go down the older I get, because if I'm not working, I'm not commuting, paying those expenses. I happen to work in Midtown Manhattan, where the price of a salad goes up, I think, just about every other week here. So you don't have those day-to-day expenses that you would if you're home or living the happy retired life. But what we found is that 70% is generally what I hear and what's often reported in the media and the press, what you should plan to replace in retirement. And what we found is that number is maybe a helpful average, but it doesn't align to every single individual. And that's what we're showing here is a range of incomes across the bottom of the page. So on the far left, you can see a $30,000 annual income. On the far right, you can see a $300,000 annual income and everything in between. So this is just to give you an example. And you can see across the top in the purple, your replacement rate will vary pretty greatly based on your income. So if someone is making $100,000, you're north of 85% replacement rate. So again, this is where it's important to work with your advisor to customize a strategy that's tailored specifically to you and what these numbers might look like for you and your family. And if you take it one step further, how does this play out in terms of answering one key question? Am I on track or not? And one helpful way to answer that question is to use this page here, which we call checkpoints. Now, look, your personal mileage will vary here. We're using a number of assumptions, which you want to read. They're on the right side of the page and down below in the eye chart. But what this does is just helps give you a helpful guidepost. So, for example, if I am 45 years old, so I find my age on the left-hand side of the page, vertically up and down. And if I find my income on the top of the page going horizontally, so 100,000 on the left, 300,000 on the right. If I find the intersection of my age and income, that will give me a checkpoint. So for example, if I'm 45 years old and I make $200,000 a year, you can see the number there is 860. That means 860,000 is a general guidepost of how much I should have saved towards my retirement at this date and time at age 45 years old, making $200K. Now, if you're above that, fantastic. If you're below that, don't stress too much. That's where you still have time to check in. So it's important, again, check in with your advisor, see if these numbers align with where you're at. But also this is where you have an opportunity to go even deeper beyond this, because not all these assumptions apply to all of you. So this is where your Paragon advisor can really dig deeper and come up with more targeted numbers for you. But it's just a helpful guideline. Now, I'm going to jump ahead to other sources of income, and Social Security being an important one. And I will share with you. So our team gets a lot of questions on a daily basis into an inbox. And I would say Social Security is probably the lion's share of those, which is interesting because as part of my role, like I don't manage anything related to Social Security. Your advisors don't manage anything related to Social Security, but you have to recognize it's an important part of that retirement equation. Unfortunately, there's a lot of mystique, mystery, complexity around Social Security. Basically around when should I elect my benefit? At what age? So a lot of numbers on the page here. I'm going to walk you through just some of the key things you really need to know and to think about. And it comes down to three numbers: 62, 67, and 70. So as you probably guessed, those represent different ages. So 62 is generally the earliest you would claim your Social Security. Age 67 is considered your full retirement age. And that's if you're born 1960 or later. And age 70 is the latest you'd want to push off taking your Social Security benefit. Now, why do the ages matter? Well, they matter because when you claim, or what age you claim at, will determine how much you actually get from the Social Security Administration on a monthly basis. So I'll start at age 67, your normal or full retirement age. That's where you are eligible for 100% of the benefit you've accrued over your working years. On the far end, you can see the barbell across the bottom portion of the page. On the far left, you can see age 62. Since you're taking your benefit early, there actually is going to be a reduction in how much you're getting paid from Social Security on a monthly basis. And when you look at it in terms of the dollars and cents, it's about a 70% value. Or put another way, you're taking a 30% reduction in your benefit if you claim at 62 versus age 67. On the flip side, if you elect to claim at age 70, since you're putting off taking those benefits until later, or further into the future, you're going to get a larger check. And it's about a 24% difference over claiming at age 67 your full benefit. So we've had some people look at this and say, okay, I should definitely claim later, age 70. Is that the takeaway from the chart? And my short answer to that is, like many things, it depends. And I think it depends on a number of things. Well, first of all, we talked about longevity. What does longevity look like for you in your family? If you expect to live a long life, then maybe it does benefit you to put off claiming later. Or maybe longevity is not in the cards and you're better off claiming earlier. The other way to think about it is, what kind of income am I going to generate from my investments in retirement? And do I have enough income coming from my investments so that I can push off claiming Social Security? So you can see how all of these things are decisions that shouldn't be made in isolation. You got to think about your investment portfolio, what you're generating there, think about your longevity, and that can help inform your Social Security decision. And I'll leave it there, but I think the important thing is not what is the optimal thing, because that will depend on all of you as individuals, but it's really about making a more informed decision. Because once you make that decision, it's generally irrevocable. So you want to make sure you have the information up front. So hopefully this is a helpful starting point there. Now, I'm going to jump ahead here. I mentioned in some of my opening remarks that retirement planning involves a lot of different decisions. And put another way, it's not just about retirement, and it's bigger than that. It's a much broader financial planning conversation. And sometimes it can be challenging to figure out, okay, I have multiple goals. I might be trying to save for retirement, make sure my money lasts as long as I do. But you know what? I may be taking care of aging parents, might also be funding college for my children. There's all these different competing goals. So this is a helpful chart that can just kind of give you some guidelines in terms of prioritization. And like a lot of things I'm showing you, your personal mileage will vary here. But the best way to start is at the bottom. So where it says, well, start here, number one, and making sure you have an emergency savings account. And what we found from our research is that for most workers, 2 to 3 months is typically an ample emergency savings amount. But once you get beyond that, And once you've covered your short-term goals, thinking through like cash or savings accounts, that's when you really need to think about investing, because now you're looking at medium-term, longer-term goals where you can take advantage of markets and having an asset allocation that aligns more closely to those goals and the timing around them. So think of this as kind of a choose your own adventure, but just kind of like a way to think about the journey. So once you fill that emergency savings bucket, that's where you can start funding your retirement accounts and look at other things. And I won't walk through everything on the screen here, but I think it's important to lean into your advisor. And this is where like the team at Paragon can probably be helpful, because even if they're not managing each one of these components, so for example, you may have a workplace or a 401k plan available to you. If they're not currently managing that, it's probably helpful at least to bring that up in the conversation. So at least they can think of that in the context of your overall plan and retirement readiness. The other thing to think about is not just the investments and how you're allocating them, but also to think about the different types of accounts you're using. So much like I'm sure many of you think about the importance of diversification, so investing in different underlying investments, a mix of stocks, bonds, cash, so on and so forth. It's important to diversify from a tax perspective. And this is just a quick example of a number of different taxable and tax advantage vehicles that you might have available to you. So starting at the bottom, thinking of your workplace, your traditional 401k, your IRAs, then you have your taxable accounts, Roth accounts. What we found, it's often helpful to have some type of mix of these buckets. And importantly, try not to be overweighted in one bucket versus another, because at the end of the day, taxes do matter. And regardless of your view on where taxes are headed or what might happen going forward, one thing we do know with certainty is that your spending in retirement, it's not based on what you earn, it's based on what you keep. So it's important to talk to your advisor looking at your investments through the tax lens as well. And I'm just going to make a few other comments around overall like retirement readiness or retirement wellness. And outside of the investments, thinking about your health is super important. And here's why, and this comes under the category of planning for what ifs. And one of the big what ifs is what happens if I experience some type of disability. And I should say, a disclaimer up front, this is like the daunting part of the presentation. So like some reality checks perhaps, but it's important to factor these things into the planning here. And, what we're showing here is for those in the population 65 plus, what's the likelihood that they will experience or require some type of assistance due to inability to perform their daily activities or having some type of cognitive impairment. So yes, real stuff here. And what you can see is that nearly half of those age 90 or above require some types of assistance. Even at age 80, starting at age 80, you can see the numbers climb incrementally. So along with all that, you also need to think about as we age overall, it's not just about not being able to do the things we otherwise might have been able to do when we were younger and healthier, but it may require other things. It may require a move. I may be required to downsize, make home modifications, or I may have to pay for help. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But all of these things could change your spending strategy, especially later in life. So it's important to plan ahead around those. And as it relates to long-term care, I think an important place to start is, again, probabilities of actually needing to fund that. And then we will talk quickly about the costs here. And look, the reality is for some of us, family members, loved ones, friends, they may provide some type of elder care for us, but that could be challenging as well. Some of us may not want to be a burden to our family in that regard. And also it's important to think about the progression of care can often escalate as we get older. And, I can share with you just on a personal note, I experienced this recently with my parents, and my dad recently passed away, but in his, final, moments, he was in a long-term care facility. There were a lot of costs that came with that. And also leading up to that, my mom was his primary caregiver. So she had to actually stop working to take care of him. And, so it's important to plan for these things before you're actually in the moment. And what are the chances of being in the moment per se? And that's what we're showing at the bottom of the chart here, is showing that the lifetime cost of care, it's not insignificant. Yes, it can vary widely depending on how long it lasts. Also, where you live, the cost can vary widely as well. But for many of us who do experience, unfortunately, it's not a small number. And that can sometimes derail your best laid retirement plans. And to put some context around it, even what we're showing on the page here, you just look at averages. For women, it's almost $280,000 spent on care. For men, it's a little bit lower at $200,000. But again, not small numbers. And if you're wondering, why are there differences between women and men? One of the big reasons is that, women sometimes require more care. They generally live longer, so they may have a longer duration of care there as well. And that's also reflected at the top of the page here. So bottom line here is hopefully I haven't, soured anyone with the daunting numbers and probabilities, but I think it just highlights the need to factor these things. And again, plan around what if scenarios. You plan for the best as well, and that's good and well intentioned, but you have to plan for worst case scenarios as well. So I'm going to wrap up the comments with just, two more visuals here. And, hopefully one thing you take away from the discussion is that you want to structure your strategy, your investment strategy around all of your goals. And again, recognizing that many of you will have many different and sometimes at least goals that feel like they're competing with one another. And we've kind of distilled this thinking in this triangle here. And there's three parts to this triangle, as you can see. So starting at the bottom, something we call stable spending. In the middle, we see variable spending in retirement. And at the top, our legacy. Now, some people refer to these things as like needs and wants. So stable spending, maybe those are your needs. Variable spending, those are the wants. We didn't put that labeling here because it's not my job to tell you what is a need, what's a want. Like I've happened to have dogs most of my life, and paying for pet care and things like that, for me, that's a need. Others may view that as a want, and you may have your own vision of needs and wants, but that's a personalized decision there. The important thing is, again, match your investment strategy and the solutions you're working with your advisor on to each one of those goals. So just to give you some quick examples here, looking at your stable spending, think of those as your ongoing expenses that you have every single month. That's where you want to be aligned. Maybe you want to be in generally or, safe or guaranteed funding sources. So that's where like Social Security, like we were talking about earlier, can help fund some of those stable expenses, or if you have access to a pension, or maybe you're looking at insurance-related solutions. That's where you can get that monthly paycheck that marries up with those needs or those stable spending goals there. On the other hand, look at your variable spending. That's where you want to look at your portfolio perhaps and thinking about how much income you can take out of your portfolio and sustain that for 30 plus years in retirement, for example, just to make sure like all those expenses are covered. And then once you've covered those, that's where you can look at your legacy. And, certainly if leaving a legacy to your children, grandchildren, charity, community, whatever it might be, that's where it certainly makes sense to look at longer term investments. And, just given the longer time horizon, it gives you a better opportunity to maximize those assets that you can potentially pass on. And with that, the last thing I'll talk about is markets. No, not crystal ball projections on markets, but specifically market timing. And, we hear a lot about this. And the important thing is that there's a lot of money that's earmarked for retirement, but many people have that money sitting on the sidelines, not invested. It might be sitting in a savings account, a CD. And look, I understand for some time, cash equivalent accounts have generally paid a decent rate of return, but that's not the case going forward over the medium or long term generally. And there's also people waiting for something to happen. For some folks, it was, okay, a few months ago was the election. Then it transforms into, okay, what policies are going to be put in place? There's always a reason to wait to get invested. And that's where we see a big pitfall happening. Because waiting for something to happen, you may actually miss the boat on something that does happen. And that's what we're showing here is the pitfalls of trying to time markets. And sitting on the sidelines does come with costs. And here's the thing. Trying to time markets, I think about it as like trying to scratch your ear with your elbow. It's super difficult for anyone to do it well. And I'll spare you guys the visual there. But the reason why it's so difficult is because the best days and the worst days in the market pretty much occur very close to one another. And sometimes they're adjacent or consecutive days. Bad markets one day, great markets the next day. So it happens very quickly. And when you look back over the past 20 years, 7 of the best days in the market occurred within 2 weeks of the 10 worst days. So again, very difficult to try to time those ups and downs in the markets. And what does that mean actually in terms of dollars and cents? And that's what we're showing on the chart here. So on the far left, that tallest blue bar, this is hypothetical, someone who had invested in the S&P 500 over a 20-year time period, and they were a buy and hold investor. They put $10,000 in, didn't touch it, picked their head up at the end of 20 years. They would have had nearly $64,000, and they would have experienced, on average, about a 10% rate of return per year. However, what if they just missed only 10 days, 10 of the best days in the market out of that 20-year time period? And quick back of the napkin math, that's 5,000 days the market was open. You missed only 10 of the best. You could see that second bar from the left, your portfolio value would have been cut in half. If you missed the next 10, it's cut in half again, so on and so forth. So the takeaway is, if you are indeed planning for retirement and you're looking at years, if not decades, before you're going to totally spend down your portfolio, getting invested, staying invested is super important. At the end of the day, it's not about timing markets, it's time in the markets. So back to what I said at the beginning, control the things that you can control, but have a plan in place for those things that are outside of your control. So with that, Phil, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Michael. That was, I think you covered a wide spectrum of topics for our clients to think about. At this point, we do want to open it up to questions. So if you want to unmute yourself and pose a question, you should be muted at this time. If you're on your laptop or computer, if you scroll on your screen to bottom left, you'll see audio. Probably has your mic X'd out. You can click on that. It will unmute you. Or there's also in the middle of the screen at the bottom, there's a chat feature. If you just want to text or message your question, we can propose that question and try to answer any of those questions for you. If not, we'll throw in some questions on our own as well, just to stimulate the conversation. So does anyone have any specific questions off the bat? Or anyone from the Paragon team want to pose a question?
Hello, this is Stephen Crowder, and I have a question. Basically, as you move closer to retirement and you're in that last 10 to 5 years, it looks like you're planning, you have this date, right? That you sit down with your advisor and you say, okay, it's going to be 64, 67, 70, whatever that day is. But based on your chart, most people have to retire prior to that for reasons outside of their known planning, right? So what things do you do to cover those years in between your plan date and those dates that come about? Is like, how do you structure your plan so that that is not something you have to worry about?
Michael, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. I'll kick things off. I think, well, first of all, I appreciate the question, Stephen. It's a great question because, yeah, that, like we saw in the chart, that is the reality. So for things such as like disability is one of the big reasons. And I think that's something that often gets underestimated or overlooked. So having some type of disability policy can be helpful, at least providing some type of income bridge, like if you do retire at 62 versus 63 or 64, that can be helpful. I think it's also important that you have some type of emergency savings account as well. And again, that will vary. For retirees, we do actually see that emergency savings of 6 months is what most people require for workers. I think I mentioned earlier it's about 2 to 3 months. But again, like your mileage will vary there. So the important thing is making sure that you have enough liquid assets to cover you to plan for those what if scenarios. But importantly, the flip side of it is you don't want to tilt the scales too much towards having liquid. When I say liquid, I'm talking about mostly cash equivalents. You want to make sure that you have investments, and you may want to bucket your investments based on different time horizons. But Bill, I don't know if you had any thoughts there as well.
Yeah, the biggest thing is, I think when we look at that chart is always have a plan, or Michael Tyson says, you always have a plan until you get punched in the face. And life can certainly throw you some curveballs, and a bit like Michael mentioned, a big decision maker in terms of when we retire is that, some people are like, oh, I'll work till I'm 70, or I can work till I'm 72 or 73, because they love what they do, or they just like to keep busy. But sometimes health issues come about that make those decisions for us. So having levels of protection, whether it be increased cash reserves, access savings to supplement more than we all have these like goals of retirement, and those goals are constantly moving scale. Some people want to vacation in Hawaii every winter, and some people just want to spend time with their grandkids. But the more you have on the cushion side that, hey, I could afford this lavish lifestyle, but I want to protect myself and not overspend, especially in those early years or as you're getting closer to retirement, so that you have a cushion there, from not only your IRAs, but your cash savings and hopefully some non-retirement assets as well, so that not everything you pull from is taxable, to cover some emergencies. I don't know if Charlie or Ricardo want to add any other insights to that.
The only thing you guys said it all really. The only thing I might want to add or expand upon is having also realistic flexibility within your long-term planning. We all like to have goals of what we want our life to look like in 5, 10, 20 years or whatever, but we also have to be realistic that sometimes we have outside forces that control things like unexpected layoffs, like you were saying your dad Michael, that kind of happened to him. The same thing happened to my dad back in 2008. He got laid off unexpectedly, and he thought he was going to enter into like a good coasting time into retirement and had to end up retiring early. So plans change as always, are fluid. I say all the time, people come in here and with certain ideas, and by the time we see them 12 months later, 36 months later, or whatever, they have completely different plans because now they have grandkids. Now they want to move. Now they want to do this. Now they had a death in the family, whatever the case may be. So, it's important for us to be able to have plans, but understand that they're not set in stone, and we have to be a little bit flexible as well.
I think also kind of to piggyback off that, Ricardo, too, is and what Phil said is it's kind of a bad word, but budgeting, being true to yourself as far as what your spending are, what your expenses are for your lifestyle. I think that's something really to be looked at and taken into consideration as well. So to get a good idea of kind of like what you would have, what you need to save up in order to maintain your lifestyle or to make adjustments accordingly. So those are things as well, I think, that need to be adjusted and take consideration.
Thanks, team. You can move on to, I guess, other questions.
Thank you. Any other? You want to jump in, or you want to? I could throw a couple of questions out there as well.
I have a question, Michael. In your experience, you've been doing this for a while, the guide to retirement and all that. Taxes in retirement. We've seen over the last 30 years, there's been such a push for people to invest in 401ks, and even one of the slides mentions that's an important part, and Red App absolutely is. I mean, you get that, especially when you get the match from your employer and everything else. But what we've seen also is that ends up creating a little bit of a taxable situation for when people retire that they're not necessarily prepared for. What are some of the shifts that you've seen in the last few years of people trying to mitigate that, in your experience?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Ricardo. I'm glad you asked that because, for many of us, it's if you've been investing diligently in your 401k, for example, and plus if you're getting a match on top of that, you can accumulate some significant assets over time. And I think the point you're getting at is if you're in a traditional 401k, like the first dollar you take out of that and every dollar thereafter is going to be taxable. And it's taxable at ordinary income rates, which are generally higher than capital gains rates. So back to the theme of it's not what you've been earning, it's what you're actually able to keep and able to spend. So yeah, there certainly are some strategies around that. And like under the idea of tax diversification, we see some folks will start to either shift their investments. So in the workplace, if they have a Roth 401k option, they may do some type of mix in traditional. The great thing about a Roth 401k, aside from the fact that it will come out tax-free, it's after-tax dollars going in, so which is different than traditional, which is pre-tax, but it will grow tax-free, come out tax-free, and there's no income limits on it, unlike your Roth IRA, which does have income caps, which some folks might qualify for, other households won't based on their income. So it gives higher earners the option to invest in a Roth through the workplace Roth. But the other thing we see is Roth conversions and taking your IRA and converting some of those assets into a Roth. Now, there's tax considerations to doing that. You might pay some tax now, but the goal down the road is to have more tax-free income when you're actually spending years down the road in retirement. And I think one of the misconceptions is that a Roth conversion is like an all or nothing scenario, and it's not. You can do partial conversions, and that's where, for everyone listening on the call, I encourage you to talk to your Paragon advisor. Just if that's something you're considering, find out like what is the right mix for you between Roth and traditional, and how much to convert, and also when. The timing of doing it is important because you want to look holistically at your overall financial picture and other sources of income you have.
Now, I know a lot of the guide to retirement has kind of like rules of thumb, so to speak, built in there. Do you have a stage of life that may be better to convert Roth to a Roth than others? Is it earlier in the years when you're maybe making less money? Is it, right after you retire to try to take some, risk off the retirement distributions? When's a good rule of thumb, so to speak?
I guess it really depends on the income you're making that year, right, Phil? Because if you're prime income years, it's probably
of course it's going to
heavy
affect
tax.
your income bracket, so that your tax, where you are in tax brackets are going to matter. So if you have an off year,
Right.
maybe it's a good year to convert versus like your best year you ever had working. But I don't know if there was a rule of thumb that JP Morgan has.
Yeah, and you're right. You're both bringing up great points. And I'm actually going to share my screen just quickly here, just to show you. Page, can you guys see that?
Yep.
Okay, so this is a page just like how to think about it. And again, like you want to have more individualized conversation with your Paragon advisor, but like generally speaking, like for those individuals who are younger workers, they want to be, and maybe their income isn't as high as it will be potentially going forward, you should optimize the Roth 401k if you have that available in the workplace, because you might get to a point where, as your income goes up, maybe you're going to get more benefit from the pre-tax traditional. And it's an opportunity now while you're young to have more in that tax-free bucket working for you, compounding. Now, look, there's some exceptions to that. So, back to, I think it was Ricardo's question just around if someone does have a lot of their retirement assets in your traditional 401k where you're going to be looking at taxes once you start taking distributions, that's where, I think, and we're highlighting some of these exceptions at the bottom, where maybe you want to continue investing in that Roth as you get older, even as you earn more, just so you're able to kind of spread those assets across the different buckets, Roth versus traditional. And again, what I mentioned is maybe thinking of doing Roth conversions and, thinking about those relative to your income and, importantly, making sure you don't convert too much so that you get tax creep, which means you're bumping up into a brand new tax bracket. So yeah, generally speaking, this is a way to kind of visualize it. But also, the last thing I'll add on that is there have been some pretty positive changes with legislation under the Secure Act, or version 2.0 of the Secure Act, which was passed at the end of 2022. And for most of us, the old way used to be for retirement accounts is you generally had to pull money at age 70 and a half. And whether you needed it or not, the IRS wanted to start collecting taxes on those assets. And for many of us, especially if you're younger, that's pushed out as far as age 75. So if you're in that camp where maybe you can delay taking your required minimum distributions from those accounts until age 75, you might want to do a conversion in advance of that. So this way you're not taking your RMD and paying having more taxable income in the same year you're doing the Roth conversion. So a lot of ways to approach it, but it's about finding that personalized balance.
Michael, I have one more question for you. For clients that are a little bit younger, say they're 40 years old, 35, 40 years old, younger kids, they're trying to save for retirement, they're trying to get an adequate emergency fund. They have a lot more expenses in that age bracket between like 40 and 50 years old, between, college and everything else. What kind of advice are you guys giving to prioritize savings as far as being able to save for that emergency fund and being able to save for retirement, for college and all that?
Yeah, I'll kind of summarize it up front by saying the struggle is real. I am in that that age bracket, and I've got 3 kids myself, a boy and 2 girls, and I have a 20-year-old, I have an 18-year-old, and I have a 13-year-old. And I have the 18 and 20-year-old are both in college, and with them comes big bills, especially my older daughter who likes to spend. That's another story. But yeah, it's really a balancing act. And I think a good approach is to, first of all, don't overshoot one goal at the expense of the other. And what I've seen, and I've even seen this around some friends and colleagues, same age, is that, look, as a parent, like many of us want to fund education, and that's super important. And like I'm a believer that 529 plans can be a tremendous vehicle to help with those expenses. They certainly saved me a lot in terms of paying for college for my kids. But as a parent, sometimes the thinking is, I'm going to take care of my kids first, meaning let me just fund the college and make sure that's paid for. Then I'll focus on retirement because I still have time. And that can be a recipe for disaster for some of us because you're missing out on so many years of compounding, potentially tax-free compounding. So the long and short of it is, I don't think there's a short answer to it, Ricardo, but I think the answer is you need to fund both goals, but don't overshoot one at the expense of the other. Like I said, one other pitfall is resist the urge to tap into your retirement account to fund college. And like we've done some quick math on that. And we actually have a companion piece called College Planning Essentials, which kind of talks through how to navigate the education savings journey and things to think about, even navigating financial aid and other funding sources, not just 529 plans. But one thing we talk about in that guide is that for every $25,000 you take out of your retirement plans to fund college, for example, you're looking at 20 years down the road, that will cost you $80,000. So $25K you take out now will cost you about $80,000 in lost retirement savings. And some people will have the urge to take out more. Look, given where like private universities are now north of $80,000, there's big expenses. So yeah, that's where I think having the professional guidance and advice is helpful to find that balance, because I think it's a different answer for every person what that mix is.
Thank you. Like one thing I sometimes mention to my clients is like you can borrow money for college, you cannot borrow money for retirement. So, like you said, you gotta kind of prioritize both. Obviously, you can't just ignore the college savings. And obviously, if you can start a 529 plan for your kid early on and let that 18 years of compound interest or 20 years of compound interest work for you, it's going to help come the years for college. But certainly that can be a conversation, a whole separate conversation for college planning and financial aid and everything else that goes into that. I think we're coming up on an hour here, so I don't want to extend people's lunches too long. Any last minute questions, comments, concerns? Anyone wants us to address? Going once, going twice. All right. Michael, from Paragon and our clients, we want to extend a big thank you to yourself and JP Morgan Asset Management. You guys have been a great partner for us, and we appreciate your time and the resources that you provide us and our clients. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Michael.
everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.